Okay, the title of this talk is Jerusalem and Athens, God-centered versus human-centered governance. So, a question that has occurred to human beings throughout their history is how to achieve the ideal society. What are the parameters and what is the approach to achieve a virtuous and ideal society? So, firstly, this is a practical question because one day we're going to establish a city or cities and work on improving the society in general in our Holy Land. So we need to know what's our model, what are our driving principles. Furthermore, even if this wouldn't be a practical question, it, to my mind, is the question that the Torah is coming to answer. Which I'll get to that soon, why I assert that. So the Torah is here to teach us how to achieve the virtuous, perfect, ideal society. Now, typically when you talk about what the Torah is there for, so what do people think about? You think about what the purpose of the commandments is. 613 mitzvahs, what's the purpose of that? But that's because we're so used to that as being a concrete form, external, practical form that the Torah takes. But if you really want to think what the Torah is there to accomplish, you have to think about what purpose are the mitzvahs serving. And furthermore, we'll touch upon this briefly, but we're not going to go into the whole question. But the mitzvahs are not the first thing that the Torah is about. The first thing the Torah is about is the relationship between God and humanity in various ways. And then when the Jewish people become a nation, that's when we get the 630 commandments. So clearly that then is the commandments, that is, are there to uphold or support something fundamental, which we have to say, well, what is the fundamental question that the Torah is there to solve, and what is the fundamental approach that the Torah is taking? The mitzvahs are secondary to that. Okay, so in order to understand the Torah, so besides the fact that we have a practical question, when we make our ideal society, how are we going to do that? We also want to understand the Torah, and in order to understand the Torah, we have to ask this question that we started this talk with, which is, how do we achieve the ideal society? We have to ask that question on our own. Which I mean to say is we have to reason that question from first principles. If you cannot, the person who's not capable of reasoning political questions from first principles can't understand the Torah. Why? Because if the Torah is there to solve a political problem by political problem I mean to say a challenge that humans have in how to live, how to live as a society, perhaps as individuals as well. But if I'm talking political problems, so we're talking about how to live as a society, how to create the good society. If that's what the Torah is coming to solve, then we have to, in order to understand the Torah, we have to be able to think about that same question critically. We have to think about it not from the lens of the Torah, but sort of prior to the Torah, and ask ourselves, why is the Torah's answer the correct answer? We can't just accept the Torah as a gzeros hakosov, as a fiat, as a law. In other words, the essential ideas, we have to, in order to understand the essential ideas, we have to be critical. And we have to ask ourselves, we have to reach the point where we can answer the question, do we agree, which is the same thing as saying, do we understand the Torah? So if you're going to reason through, if you're going to reason through what is the Torah's goal, and how is the Torah's prescription the ideal way to achieve that? If you can reason through that yourself, then you understand the Torah, or a crude way to say it is then you agree with the Torah, but no one likes to say that because we don't have to agree with the Torah. Okay, fine. But that's the same thing as saying you understand the Torah. While another person who won't reason through it on his own, or cannot, is not capable of thinking about these questions from their first principles, meaning to say, not accepting that the answer is baked in, but really understanding, well, why is that the answer? So someone who's not capable of doing that who's not capable of either agreeing or disagreeing with the Torah doesn't fully understand. And I would say that person is an NPC in the jargon, in the world of putting Torah into effect, because he's not capable of truly deciding, making decisions about implementation of the Torah. He's only being controlled by others who themselves either have ideas of what the Torah is out to achieve and how it's achieving that, or maybe are more likely there's a whole chain of people that are being controlled consciously or unconsciously by some great people who had an idea. Maybe it's only Moses, that's also a theory. But someone, someplace, had an idea. And if you're going to be a real player, then you should have the same idea. Clear so far? Okay. So why do I say that the question that the Torah is coming to answer is, that the fundamental idea that the Torah is about how to construct the ideal society. So this, of course, you may have guessed, comes from my studies about the importance, centrality of the land of Eretz Yisrael and the commandment or the ideal of living in Eretz Yisrael. And through that study, I've reached the realization that as the Chazal say all the time, Eretz Yisrael is central to the whole Torah. It's all about that in some expressions. But for our purposes, what does that mean, Eretz Yisrael? That means that the revelation to Avraham, where Hashem told him, go forth, in Bereshis 12:1, go off to the land that I will show you. So that is where Judaism begins. And because that's the relationship between God and his people begins, a specific people. And what he tells him is that there's going to be a specific mean. God tells Abraham is that there's going to be a specific approach, a specific means, a specific way to attain a perfect land, country, society. I will make you into a great nation. So the covenant or the relationship, covenant is already a loaded word and people have their ideas about it. So let's say the relationship between God and Abraham, which is the foundation of the Torah, because everything follows from that. Abraham wants a nation, and then they receive the mitzvahs. But the foundation is about achieving an ideal kind of state. That's the mission of Avraham. And let's say one of the hyperbolic statement, one of the praises, you could say, that Chazal say about Eretz Yisrael is in the Medrash Tehillim, and it says, how fortunate are those who dwell in Eretz Yisrael who have no sin. They have no sin. They're free from sin. What does that mean, they're free from sin? What that means is that the concept, the notion of the Holy Land, the notion of Eretz Yisrael as the place where Avram is going to erect a society and flourish, that notion is what allows for human perfection. That's essentially what it means. The only way to achieve human perfection as a society is to live in the Holy Land. So again, the way I'm explaining what that means is this notion that is this core of Avram's revelation, the core of his relationship with God, which is encapsulated in that pasuk, which we'll talk about what that is soon. Encapsulated in that pasuk, go off to the land I will show you. That notion is the core notion that's necessary to achieve an ideal society where people are doing what they should do. Okay? And it's important to understand that when we talk about this holiness of a land, the concept of the holiness of the land is not limited to a strip of land in the Middle East, the land of Canaan. The concept of holiness of land is something which is attainable throughout the whole earth. And that's captured in another source in Chazal where they say that eventually Eretz Yisrael is going to spread to the whole world. Now, the technicalities of how that works according to halacha, that needn't concern us. But what's important for our purposes is to understand then that what that tells us is that the essence, the essential notion of the Holy Land is not about the Holy Land, it's about land being able to become holy. Land, simply land, even the whole of the earth. So then, when we study the Torah about Eretz Yisrael, what we have to keep in mind is two things. That on the one hand, the notion is not limited to one piece of land on earth. On the other hand, that piece of land on earth is extremely important, of course, and that's for some reason or another where the nation that's charged with putting that notion into effect is going to set up their community and set up their society, and somehow that's going to be the kernel that's then going to spread worldwide when eventually the whole world attains that sanctity. But my point in saying this is just that we have to realize that this is less about a particular piece of land than about how do we approach. You see my point? Once we say that the whole world could become the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, then clearly Eretz Yisrael is a concept, it's an approach to perfection. Why do I say to perfection? Because of that first statement of Chazal, which is that if you want to be a perfect person who has no sin, this is where you have to live. So apparently there's an approach to perfection, and that approach is captured in that directive to Avram, go off to land I will show you. So what is that approach? Okay, so now we say, what's the Torah's approach to the perfect society? Genesis 12:1, go off to the land I will show you. So what is that approach? So this is something which I explained at length in my my recent book, which is there behind me. That's Aretz Asher Areka, and now it's mostly a crude translation into English has been completed on my Substack, Non-Apologetics, so you can have it in English as well. And what I explained there is that the commandment to Avram to go off to the land that God will show him was essentially that Avram was commanded to train himself in viewing earth, which is the domain of man, it's where man is active, to view it from the perspective of God. So when he says, go off to the land that I will show you, instead of reading I will show you as sort of the lesser important part of this pasuk, because everyone thinks, okay, you go off to a land, which land? I'll tell you when you get there, or maybe after you get there, depending on how you read the continuation of the parsha. But actually, no, that's the core point, that instead of Avram living in a land that people see, he's supposed to live in a land that God sees, which is how the land of Israel is described in the sixth parsha. It's a land that Hashem is always has his eyes upon. So there's a visual relationship between God and land, the land of Israel specifically, at least as we said before, to start with. And Avram is supposed to learn to see it as God sees it. The going off to land that I will show you means that he is going to be shown it by God. How are you shown something by God? What does that even mean? It means that man can transcend the human perspective, which humans tend to see certain things, the things that concern them. That's what humans tend to notice. That's what we think about, and that's what we notice. That's our perspective, and humans can, supposedly, according to this pasuk, humans can supposedly transcend their own perspective and learn to see as God does. So what does that mean to see as God does? So it means simply that what do people think about? What are people concerned with? People are concerned with what they consider to be the good. We tend to act based on a sense of what we believe is good. Now, the sense of what we believe is good is based on a lot of things. Everyone has their sense of what they believe is good, what they're attracted to, what they're interested in, what they approve of, and then they act on that basis. So the same way humans have a whole mindset, a whole worldview which informs how they think and what they think, how they think about the good and what they think is good. So does God. That's what it says in Bereshit Parak Aleph. God created the whole world, and he saw that the whole world was good. Now, what does it mean that God sees the world as good? That's refer you to that previous series we did on the guide, where we talk about that at length. But in terms of at least the parable, thinking of it as God, like the Rambam says in the guide, he says that verse which talks about God seeing the world as good is referring to God in anthropomorphic terms, because the Torah tends to do that, talk about God as in human terms, okay? But in human terms, if we understand it as a parable, but in human terms, it means that just like every human has some thing or things that drive him and that he considers to be the good and he's attracted to, so too does God consider what to be good? The totality of existence. So can a human being transcend his own view on what's good and start viewing the totality of being, or God's world as it is? Can that be his metric of what's good? So that's the claim that's being made there in this commandment of Avraham, that yes, human beings can do. Why I keep on calling it a claim is because it was never fully achieved. And that's, again, I'm referring to my book, but there's the whole story where that Keda is this attempt to achieve it and it doesn't work, and then there's this sending the spies to see the land is all about this. Can humans actually attain that kind of vision? Hasn't been achieved yet. That's why we talk about the root sin of the Jewish people is rejecting the land, because this is what everything depends on. Because the whole relationship of Avraham depends on this, and the whole Torah is downstream from that. How mitzvahs follow from that and how Moshe comes on top of that, we're not going to discuss now, although it might be relevant to our discussion at some point. But we're not going to discuss that in today's talk. But essentially, that's what humanity is charged with doing, according to the Torah, in order to attain that state of being sin-free, which is the same thing as saying the perfect or ideal society. And that's why would that achieve the perfect society? Because people tend to think about themselves, and if you think about yourself, you tend to make errors because you're self-centered, and you have an imagined good, which is not the true good, thinking about God's good. So basically, the whole humanity will become a race, as it were, of angels who are thinking about God's plan, and everyone will be busy with that, and that will be amazing. So that is the Torah model. Any questions? We can stop now for questions. No. Okay? So far, so good. So this is what the Torah teaches, how to achieve the ideal society. And now we have another path, and this is the path of the Greeks, we could say. Aristotle and Plato, of course, there are major differences and nuances, but essentially the Greek approach, philosophical approach, we can say, is that to political science, to the question of how to create the ideal society, it's, we should think about the human good. Okay? Because that's what we're out to achieve. I mean, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here, but they give us ways for individuals. Everyone's aware of the risk of individuals taking advantage and doing things for their own purposes that are to the detriment of society. So they'll give us ways for individuals to cooperate and together with other humans work it out and create a virtuous and just society. So what I'm going to do as a way of introducing their thinking is I'll take it to you. I'll present it to you from the perspective of the Rambam in the guide of the Perplexed. Why am I doing that? Because we're familiar with that, and because where I'm going to take this conversation, which is how does the Greek approach, so to speak, how does it relate to the Torah's approach? Of course, the guide is a place to look for that. But for now, I'm using the Rambam, the guide, as presentation of the pure Greek approach without any Torah influence. Obviously, I want to make that caveat clear that, of course, the Rambam himself is reading it with a Torah perspective somehow, okay? But there's that word somehow. For now, we're taking what the Rambam's presentation of some of these ideas, and I'll present them as a completely different approach than the Torah, and then we have to talk about how the two come together. So I want to read a passage from the guide, volume 2, chapter 40, where the Rambam gives us his model for a good society, essentially, and how that's supposed to come about. It has been explained with utmost clarity that man is political by nature, and that it is his nature to live in society. Okay, so man is a political creature. That's his nature. He is not like the other animals for which society is not of a necessity. Okay? So number one, man lives in society. Number two, because of the manifold composition of the species, for as you know, the last one have been composed. Okay, so humans have a certain kind of composition in terms of their physical makeup. Therefore, there are many differences between the individuals belonging to it. So that you can hardly find two individuals who are in any accord with respect to one of the species of moral habits. You won't find two people that are the same in terms of their moral habits. Okay? Except that you might find people who look similar externally. Why? The Rambam explains why. Because men are made out of different mixtures, whatever it is. Nothing like this great difference. So the Rambam points out the fact that on the one hand, man is a political creature, he has to live in society. On the other hand, there's great variety within the human race. Nothing like this great difference between the various individuals is found among the other species of animals, in which the difference between individuals belonging to the same species is small. So yes, there's some lions that are a little bit more vicious than others, but all lions are vicious. Man being in this respect an exception. You may find among us two individuals who seem, with regard to every moral habit, to belong to two different species. So humans are so different that even though they're really one species, they appear as being two different species. Thus you may find an individual cruelty that reaches a point at which he kills the youngest of his sons in his great anger. One person might be so cruel that when he gets angry, he kills his baby, whereas another individual is full of pity at the killing of a bug or any other insect, his soul being too tender for this. The same holds good for okay. So we have all different humans, all different kinds of moral habits. Now, as the nature of the human species requires that there be those differences among individuals to it, so you have all these differences, and as an addition, society is a necessity for this nature. So now we have a problem. On the one hand, we have this difference, variation between humanities. On the other hand, we have the fact that humans live as a society. It is by no means possible that a society should be perfected except through a ruler who gauges the actions of the individuals, perfecting that which is deficient and reducing that which is excessive, and who prescribes actions on moral habits, that all of them must always practice in the same way. So why is there such a thing as rulers? Why is that part of the world? Because you have this, on the one hand, you have this variety between human beings, and on the other hand, they're living together, so that creates conflict, because one guy would kill his kids and the other guy would not even hurt a fly, and meanwhile they're neighbors. So that's why you have a ruler who prescribes actions on moral habits that all of them must always practice in the same way, so that the natural diversity is hidden through the multiple points of conventional accord. So there's naturally this diversity. Comes a ruler and says, we're cutting everyone down in a Sodom bed, everyone has to be cut to size. This guy don't be so cruel to kill your kids, only whatever, discipline them, and hurt flies, you have to hurt a fly, you have to hurt your kids, whatever. Not hurt your kids, heaven forbid. You have to, whatever, discipline them, okay. So that the community becomes well ordered, right? Therefore, I say this is an important statement here, that the law, although it is not natural, enters into what is natural. So I'm not going to go into that statement, but the Rambam here is telling us why there's a reason for the Torah according to nature. But okay, the Torah is not nature, but like I said, we're not talking about the Torah now. I want to talk about the model of political science that doesn't use the Torah, and we're trying to figure out what do we need the Torah for. That's what we're going to get to. So let's think about this model for a minute. What the Rambam says over here is a shocking thing, because he says that the reason why we need a law, don't kill your kid, say, which is illegal in most democracies, most free countries, right? Why do we need that law, says the Rambam? Not because some people kill their kids, no. Because some people kill their kids, and man is a political creature, so the other guy in his community can't hurt a fly, and the guy who can't hurt a fly won't get along with the guy who's killing his kids. The implication is, in the guide, I mean, it's almost explicit, but that there's no need for anyone to be told what to do, despite the fact that they do the most vicious and cruel things, except because we need a way to order society. And this point is made explicit. Just watch out for the cord. This point is made explicit elsewhere in the guide. This is in the last chapter, in 354, volume 3, chapter 54. Where the Rambam talks about the various kinds of perfections that a human being can attain. And the third kind of perfection, the first kind of perfection is having money, the second kind of perfection is having health, and the third kind of perfection is perfecting your moral virtues. It consists in the individual's moral habits having attained their ultimate excellence. So you become a good person, good character. This species of perfection, says the Rambam, this is not the highest level of perfection. Why? Because it's a preparation for something else, not an end in itself. For all moral habits are concerned with what occurs between a human individual and someone else. The perfection regarding moral habits is only the disposition to be useful to people. Consequently, it is an instrument for someone else. For if you suppose a human individual is alone, acting on no one, you will find that all his moral virtues are in vain, and without employment and unneeded, and that they do not perfect the individual in anything. For he only needs them, and they again become useful to him in regard to someone else. So the Rambam is reiterating the same point he made in volume 2, chapter 40, which is that the concept, the whole idea that there's a perfection of character, in other words, that there's a right way that a person should be, is only a function of society. If there would be only one individual, then there would be no right way for him to be, as in to have characters, which character traits to him. So, what does that mean? So let's going back to that point that we inferred from volume 2, chapter 40, which is reiterated here. Nobody cares. Nobody can tell you what's right for you to do, except for your neighbor. That's essentially what he's saying. And even then, is he telling you what's right, or is he just forcing you to comport? That's sort of what we have to get to. That's an important question. But what's the idea over here? Let's squarely face the fact that the Rambam does not mind, as it were, that a person is cruel enough to kill his youngest child, except for the fact that that person is part of a society where that's not acceptable. How is that? Why is that okay? Why is it okay for someone to be that cruel? And the answer is because if that's his human nature, then that's it. That is the nature of the world. The same way it's lion nature, so taking the Rambam's analogy of the species, and human beings are like their different species. Well, there are species of lion, and that species is cruel to the deer, to the antelope, to the zebra, and that's just the way it is. And we model our sense of right and wrong with taking that fact of the cruelty that's there in the animal world, let's say, right? That informs our sense of what's right and wrong as humans as well. But we take that as a given. Nobody, as far as I know, has ever set out to reform and bring enlightenment to the animal kingdom, where great cruelties are perpetrated constantly. Why not? Because that's nature. Well, human beings have a nature too, so why are we looking to intervene? It sounds like you have a question there. Do you want to ask something?
Why nature answers the question.
Of cruelty?
Yeah. What is the question they're just coming to answer?
I see. Well, okay, so the question that was asked is that how does nature answer the question of cruelty? That's something very important to think about, but I think more fundamentally is that when it's natural, we don't even ask the question. Okay? Whether that's right or whether that's just because of the way we are, is that because we're just trapped in this world, so therefore we're not capable of thinking in a way that's even beyond reality, okay? Or is it that in some fundamental way we trust reality as having the information for us? I think it's the latter. I think basically we have to bridge the is-ought gap. We have to get from what is to what ought to be, and we always get from what ought to be from what is. But we have to start with what is, and we have to start with a dispassionate analysis of what is. And what is cuddly rabbits, and also bears and lions and things that go boom in the night. Yes.
I think maybe another way to say what you're saying is that in the animal kingdom, we all understand innately it's not reformable.
Okay. Well.
So it's not just nature; it's more than nature. It's nature that's stuck in nature.
Okay. So then, right. The suggestion was that the animal kingdom is different because they're not reformable, right? While humans. But then, if that's the case, then my comparison to the human who acts as vicious as a lion does, and the Rambam would leave him that way, except because of society, might not be an apt comparison because the human being is reformable. Okay, although you could say that no, the human being would not be reformable because you come to him and say, "Don't kill your kids." Why not? What are you talking about? You have to have a good reason for him not to kill his kids. The reason is because it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Working great. Everything's been working fine. No, your neighbor doesn't. So we have to. This is important. This is sort of getting to a major first question. I mean, to get a little ahead of ourselves over here, but we're comparing two models essentially of how we're looking for the good. And one of them is there's no right way to do anything, but just we have to get along because otherwise we're going to self-destruct. It's in our interests. And the other one is no, actually humans should think for God and be on His team. And of course, there's a right way to do things. What that is something to think about, but of course, there's a right way. You're thinking for God. I mean, that if a divine command means anything, it means that there's a right way to do things that's not just follow your nature. Okay, that's what it means. It means that's the first step to the concept of divine command. Now, so we're comparing, we're contrasting them. Now, to state the Rambam's approach or presentation very starkly would be to say it's all about utility. Like, no one's taking any stance on what's right and wrong, you know? And the guy who kills his kids and like, all of a sudden now we have a king and he's like, no, you can't kill your kids. And he's like, what do you mean? I was convinced, no, listen. No one's saying that there's something wrong with that, but, what? How's it go? Joey, that's not working out for me, whatever, right? Just not working out. It's not working out so well. Or, so that's like the extreme way of saying this is not about God or divine value in any inherent way. It's just utilitarian. That's one extreme. Now we're seeing that there's possible in between levels where maybe this is a method to get someone to do something. Maybe this is why people respond to it. This is how God put His law into nature. Maybe a deeper way to say it. Okay, there are different ways to say it, but I'm presenting it now in the most stark way as, Rambam says, I have no problem with someone killing his kid, in principle. Now, just to parenthetically, like it is with all these things, you can't accuse Rambam, for example, let's in this case. You can't say, well, the Rambam says he has no problem with people killing their kids except for the fact that there's society. Okay, but there is society, so he's not okay with people killing. But that's another way of saying that the purpose of society is not just the Rambam taking us through steps about why this is worth it for us, but it's actually maybe society is how God maybe guides man into a certain direction. Okay, so that's, like I said, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But this is why the whole concept of, so now the Rambam says furthermore in volume 3, chapter 54, that the purpose of having refined characters for society. Now, what is refined character in Maimonidean ethics, which is really Aristotelian, this aspect is Aristotelian ethics, is the derech hamamutza, finding the mean between all extremes of character and being smack in the middle. Which Rambam never tells us why that's so valuable. But in light of what he says in both 240 and 54, which is that the purpose of training yourself in a certain kind of character is for society, we can understand why the golden mean is what we're looking to achieve, because it's a kind of game theory that's happening. It's a crude kind of game theory that's happening in society. Me and you want to be neighbors because I can't do everything on my own. Man is a political creature. Man is a society. Well, what are you going to give? What are you going to give in on? What am I going to give in on? So like I said, that's really where game theory would come in, I guess. But a very crude kind of solution, seems crude, is to say, let's just meet halfway on everything. And that's the most overarching solution for all of humanity. Let's all of humanity will meet halfway, and there'll be this mass reversion to the mean, and everyone will be mediocre. Okay, I shouldn't have said that because it's supposed to work. It's not supposed to end up being problematic. But that's the idea, right? Everyone's supposed to revert to the mean. Which, by the way, is just parenthetically, it's important because you have a question like when the Rambam wants everyone to find the mean, is that the mean of what? The mean of all of humanity, and also could that change, right? Because let's say all of humanity now has become less cruel, right? People don't kill their kids anymore. So, okay, now the center has perhaps shifted. It may be true. Okay, but here's the thing. So it's interesting to think about, and we don't tend to think about this nearly enough. In general, the world doesn't think about this nearly enough. That this is a very powerful model. This idea that a person should adjust his behavior in order to cooperate with society. It's very powerful. It's not. It sounds like you're just telling people what to do, and it's not fulfilling for the individual, but the idea here is essentially that a person is part of something greater than themselves, part of a family, and therefore, let's say, family is a unit of society, small unit of society. Obviously, there's a marriage as well, and Aristotle approaches it that way in politics. There's various units of society, and thinking about fitting into that kind of unit and being a productive and positive, valuable member of a unit is not telling a person, oh, you can't be yourself. It's, in a certain sense, it's expanding the person and it's giving him a sense of identity that is greater than himself. And it's unfortunate that we don't have that as a society. I think we who are now going to, as I started this talk, saying we're going to establish cities and to fulfill our mitzvah of sanctifying the land. This is something very important to bring back. Concern for society. We have a very interesting, I'll put the link in here, there's one of my talks on the Rambam's introduction to Perplexed where he gives his ethics, and I showed that the Rambam values extreme behavior for certain people who are seeking great knowledge, enlightenment, but it keeps that a secret, or he expects them to keep it a secret. Because extreme behavior is fundamentally destabilizing to society. And that means to say, even very important, right? Very important idea. Even extreme behavior that we, and when I say we, I mean the current yeshiva world, say, even extreme behavior that we hold up as being, very holy and very close to God, and it is, but that's destabilizing because it's sort of antisocial, and it's antisocial in the sense that not everyone could be that way, so why are you giving a message that that's the way to be? And therefore the Rambam, who says, yes, some people should in fact be, let's say, ascetic and separate from this world, but they should hide that as well, because that's not a message that you want to give to the public. And that kind of consideration, I want to repeat, I feel like that kind of consideration, the fact that we're lacking that kind of consideration is a terrible loss, which is easily recoverable, especially among our people who has a real sense of community. I think it's something we can work on, getting back that kind of idea that, like, I'm going to act a certain way because I'm really thinking about what that does for the polis, to borrow that Greek word. That's the idea of the polis. A man is a member of a polis, and that's your civic duty. It's not just like, oh, you must do something. It's like you're a greater person because you're part of something great, and you want to contribute to that. We've gotten very used to the idea of individual, striving and perfection, that we sort of forgot about the greatness and the satisfaction, the fulfillment that a person can get by contributing to the polis. Okay, go. Question there?
Yeah, just maybe this is off topic, but in any reversion to a mean, it's going to be inherently made up of different levels of extremism.
Right. Okay. So what?
So the way you're describing it is that the Rambam says, oh, you'll have one or two cases of extremism, they should keep it to themselves, but maybe it's really the melting pot of all of the extremists that allows for society to function.
Well, yeah, that's true. So the question is about whether everyone has to come into the mean or someone can stay at the extremes, right?
The mean is only made up of varying.
Well, it's always going to be shifting too. That's the thing, right? It's always going to be moving around as well. But
if an ideal society is that everybody is reverting to the mean, then there's no more mean.
That's the thing. That's sort of what I was getting to before about anything mediocre. Right. Well,
maybe it's not so mathematical.
I mean, I don't know what happens then. I guess there's always going to be deviations, and therefore there's always going to be this struggle to get things back to somewhere in between. It's an interesting thing.
So
That's why I think game theory comes in. Now that game theory should be applied to this and see what it means and say, well, no, I think so.
How do we implement getting people to go to the meeting?
We get that, according to the Rambam, we get that by encouraging them to consider the fact that it would be beautiful if they can get along with everyone else. Simply.
So we expect people to...
Well, we have to encourage... Okay, that's an interesting question. Are you get something with this?
No,
okay, no, because there's something interesting.
We expect people to...
But why do we expect people to do this?
Yeah.
So, right. So that's what I was trying to say before about that. It's you're living in a greater sense of self than your individual self when you're contributing to again, could be a family in the model Rambam's discussing. It's a society of polis, which is the greater society. Could be a country, perhaps you reach a certain size where you lose this. That's obviously a part of the reason why modern man we don't have this, because we live in such big cities, and our own community is sort of not a society, a political society in certain ways, so it's hard to achieve this. But again, we're going back to Eretz Yisrael, and we're going to do it there, right? So we're figuring that out. Okay, so here's the question I want to ask. Now we have two models, right? We have the Torah that says, think about God's good. And then we have the Greeks, as I said, represented through Maimonides, but of course he has much more to say about that, which is think about the human good. So my question is, this is my question on Torah, what's the point of thinking about God? What's the point of being a froma and being consumed with God's perspective? We should think about ourselves. I mean, that's what we're concerned with. Are we not concerned with ourselves? Is it not sufficient for us to be perfect humans? What is perfect human? Again, I want to make that clear. Perfect human is someone who's not focused on his own aspect of humanity, but is thinking about the whole of humanity. And there are other people different than him, and he will be willing to adjust himself for them. Okay, so he's becoming a perfect human, greater than himself. So what does it add? What does it add? What does it add for our own success? Does it add for our own success to think about the world from God's perspective? Okay, because if it doesn't contribute to human flourishing, then I maintain, this is what I'm asserting, we won't do it. So it has to be that if this is the Torah's model, it has to be that humans require this for their own purposes.
Why?
So because it's not going to happen, it won't happen. I'm claiming that nothing happens unless humans they're interested. Okay, you could argue on that claim. You could perhaps argue on that claim, but I'm asserting that. We'll leave that, and then my question is, does the Torah do anything for us? Okay, so or in general, of course, you can ask a question just in a very simple way. I made a lot of quick assumptions here in my questions, which perhaps you can debate. That last one is one of them. But you can just ask in general, what is the relationship between these two models? Okay, that's a fair question. What is the relationship between these two models? Do they conflict? Do they work together? Okay, so I want to put forth, again, the two models are, how do you make a good society? Do you encourage people to think about everyone else? Everyone should think about everyone else? Or nobody should think about anybody? Everyone should think about God. Two vastly different models, hence the title, Jerusalem and Athens, God-centered versus human-centered governments. Okay, that's how I see it. How do we achieve the Aretz? How do we achieve that land that we're looking to achieve, the Holy Land? And again, how do we sanctify Earth in general? How do we create a society where people are perfect and don't have sin? Is it God-centered or is it human-centered? Those are the questions. Okay. So what's the relationship over here? So I wanted to put forth, to conclude, the various, as I see it, the various possibilities. I might be missing one or two, and I welcome, of course, any feedback about which kinds of approaches I perhaps have missed here. But here's how I see the possibilities. Either these are contradictory, as in the Torah is completely not interested in this kind of thinking about humans. It wants us to think about being essentially, as I said, angels, thinking about the world from God's perspective and doing His work, and that's all that's supposed to concern us, okay? Or perhaps there are actually two things happening, and there are different people that are supposed to do both. Maybe one of them is for the elites, and one of them is for the masses, okay? Which is for which? So again, I'm trying to figure out, does the Torah also care about this kind of model of humans thinking about each other? So perhaps it does. And perhaps the Torah is for the masses. Maybe. In other words, the philosophical way, what we're really looking to achieve is that humans should be humans. And really, if you want to be a philosopher, how does a human a human? By thinking about all humans. Okay. But you know what? That's not so inspiring to people, and it's not so, that doesn't get people to do the good. So let's start telling people as an exercise, as an imaginary exercise, and others to say that means something that inspires their imagination. Think about the world from God's perspective, be on God's team. Awesome. Okay. That's one way to look at it. Or the opposite. Or maybe that's nice for regular people. Tell them to think about other humans. But there's a higher person who can actually think about God. Just putting out the options over here. I want to give you two more options and then put out the last one, which is the one I'm going to be, the tack I'll be taking. The last two options are that philosophically speaking, what we're looking to achieve is a flourishing of humanity, which is humans perfecting themselves by thinking about other humans. But in order for the prophets to do their general job, they need to have a divine-centered model to approach everything, and this is what anchors it. That's a little bit cryptic. I'm not going to go into that, but that's not so different than what I said before. But just it's more like for the prophets in their role of teaching things to man. We'll probably get back to this point in some way, because the reason why we'll get back to this point in some way, just to tell you what's coming, is that the Rambam himself says that the golden mean, the Derech HaMamutza, is called the path of Hashem, and the prophets called Hashem merciful, gracious, all the titles they gave God, is because they're teaching mankind the way of God. So basically the point is that prophets have a big role in bringing God into the picture. Okay, that's just leaving that point. I just want to map out the possibilities. Or here's another way that maybe the whole question was a mistake, because maybe the whole question was an error. My question was, if we're thinking about God, so everyone's going to be thinking about God, everyone's going to be doing the good thing because they're thinking about God, not because they're thinking about their neighbor. So how do these two things work together? But maybe the Rambam is being practical and saying, yes, everyone should think about God, but not everyone does. The guy who kills his kids is not doing this mitzvah of seeing the world from God's perspective, maybe, because maybe he wouldn't kill his kids. Okay, now why do I say maybe? How can you say someone will see the world from God's perspective and still kill his kids? Maybe he would, because if it's his nature to kill his kids, that's part of God's perspective. This is where things get really tricky, okay? This is where things get, that point that gets very tricky. But let's assume for a second that if a person did see the world from God's perspective, he wouldn't kill his kids. And the Rambam was like, very nice, if only everyone would see the world from God's perspective. But the fact is that some people kill their kids, some people don't hurt flies. Why do some people kill their kids and some people not hurt flies? Because some people are impressed with this message of seeing the world from God's perspective, and some people are not. But that's a fact. So given that fact, now what? So you still need laws, meaning to say, the Torah is giving you a model of what humans should be, and then they wouldn't need laws, perhaps, if they would all achieve this. This gets at a question of where do the laws of the Torah fit into this vision, okay? But this is one way to talk about it. That, yes, if everyone would be Avram, then we wouldn't need the law, but not everyone is Avram. Some people kill their kids, okay? That's a bunch of different ways that might go together. I want to end with one more approach to this, and this is what I intend, because I think this is correct, this is what's interesting to me, but maybe I'm sure between now and then there may be some other ways of thinking, that actually all we care about is the human good, and actually what the Rambam is describing is really what our concern is, that human beings should be humans. But this is critical. This aspect, or this perspective of viewing it from God's perspective, is critical to save the project of humanity trying to be humans. So there's the real project is humans that want to be humans. That's really what humans should do, because they're humans. What else should they do? But there's a major pitfall, a danger, that the Torah is claiming. You need this whole business of seeing it from God's perspective to protect you from. So that's what my thinking, and that's what we'll explore next time. That this is the key to the project of humanity. Project of humanity is described as Rambam describes it and others, but we need to have this vision. But I'll leave it at that until next time. Any questions to end? After.